The Assembly of First Nations gets set to elect a new national chief this week in Ottawa.
We've been told several times at the National Inquiry that the first 24 hours after a person goes missing, those are critical times.
Calls for a public alert system are finally being answered.
I could be Funalana oversharing my trauma stories at work.
And an all-Indigenous female comedy group takes the stage in Vancouver. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Savannah Kelly. First Nations leaders from across the country are meeting in Ottawa this week for the Assembly of First Nations Special Chiefs Assembly and National Chief election. While many will be at the Assembly, the vote itself will be conducted online using a digital ballot to accommodate chiefs and proxies who will be attending virtually. The vote to elect the 13th AFN National Chief was set in motion after Roseanne Archibald was ousted from the position earlier this year. Archibald was the first woman to hold the role, but she was voted out over a series of human resources complaints, although she maintained her removal was, in part, over her push for a forensic audit of the AFN. 6 candidates are running for National Chief. Reginald Belrose of Saskatchewan, who came in second to Archibald in 2021, Craig Mackinac from Alberta is a former chief and AFN regional chief. Sheila North from Manitoba is a former journalist and Grand Chief for First Nations in Northern Manitoba. David Pratt from Saskatchewan is a vice chief at the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. Dean Sayers is the sole candidate from Ontario and a former chief. And Cindy Woodhouse rounds out the list. She is an AFN regional chief for Manitoba. Voting begins on Wednesday. The winner will be the person who gets 60% of the votes cast by those registered. The term for the next national chief has also been adjusted to expire in July 2027, extending the term of office to 3 years and 6 months. 1 year ago, we learned about the deaths of Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and the as-of-yet unidentified Buffalo woman. Police announced the remains of the 3 women may be in Winnipeg area landfills. Since then, there's been a fight to search for the women. As Tamara Pimentel reports, 1 year later, families are still waiting for answers.
Family and friends of Morgan Harris gather 1 year to the day after her death was announced. This is where a vigil was held last year, on December 1st, 2022, outside the former home of the alleged serial killer who has been charged for the murders of Harris, Rebecca Contois, Mercedes Myron, and Buffalo Woman. For Morgan's daughter, Cambria Harris, not much has changed in the year.
My mother, Morgan, she's my waking thought every single day when I wake up and before I go to bed. My mind's been in an endless cycle 24/7 for the last 365 days.
Contois' partial remains were found in the Brady landfill in June 2022. And 1 year ago, police announced the deaths of Harris, Myron, and Buffalo Woman. They told the public their remains may be in the Prairie Green landfill north of Winnipeg. That sent ripples through the Indigenous community as a call to search the landfill caused tension between supporters and the Manitoba government. A camp for Morgan was set up outside the Brady landfill in December 2022, with Camp Mercedes following suit outside the Museum for Human Rights. Those camps are still active today.
This last year has been probably the hardest years that I've ever had to face in my life. It was 1 year ago that mine and my family's life had changed forever. And it's not changed in a good way.
In October, newly elected Premier Wab Kinew met with the families to discuss a search, but a date has not been confirmed. Morgan's cousin, Melissa Robinson, says all the family wants is closure.
Here we are exactly a year later at the exact same time, still mourning her. Still just as sad as we were 1 year ago. And why is that? Because we haven't been able to lay her to rest.
Cambria wants the public to remember Morgan as a fun-loving mother who faced intergenerational trauma.
What's important? just to recognize the hardships that Morgan had to face throughout her life. I want you to remember her as a loving mother of 5 who fought hard to get her voice heard.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Manitoba's Advocate for Children and Youth is calling for urgent action and a comprehensive youth mental health strategy. Sherry Gott is calling for the province to act quickly after the province reported the highest annual number of deaths by suicide. For more on the report and the path forward, we're joined in studio by Sherry Gott. Thanks for joining us today, Sherry. So the Manitoba Children's Advocate report paints a pretty grim picture. The highest number of total deaths among children and youth, and a staggering increase in the number of deaths by suicide. What do you think is behind these statistics?
Thank you for having me. One of the things that we have noticed is that the effects of the pandemic, the children and youth and young adults didn't have access to their social system during the lockdowns, and they weren't able to get involved at the school level. And since then, children are having a difficult time in associating with their peers, and there's a lot of experiencing isolation and mental health issues.
And you're calling for urgent action. What do you think can be done?
I'm calling on all levels of government to respond to the crisis in Manitoba. We had 37 young people die as a result of suicide between the ages of 10 to 21. And I'm asking that the government respond to the crisis and develop a mental health strategy for young children and youth.
And this is your first full year in the role of Manitoba's Advocate for Children and Youth. What are some of the other things that stick out for you?
One of the things that I've been finding is that there is a lack of response in the areas of mental health and addictions for children and youth. We've had a crisis in Manitoba this past year, and there hasn't been a strategy developed. The previous government did not respond, although they did try and develop 5 pillars of mental health, but that didn't outline the plan to respond to the crisis.
Well, we'll leave it there, but thanks again, Sherry, for taking some time to speak with us about this today.
Thank you for inviting me.
An Edmonton Nonprofit is raising money to help youth who need services due to family and community problems. They say demand is outpacing their services. APTN's Chris Stewart has more.
16 emergency beds, so we were talking about how we want to remove shelters, the concept of a shelter. Here,
Margot Long is the president and CEO of YES, Youth Empowerment and Support Services. They have provided services for youth 15 to 21, such as emergency shelters, mental health services, help finding permanent housing since 1981. Long says that demand for their services has been skyrocketing. She says nearly half of youth who come here are Indigenous.
I'm seeing about 30% increase in the mental health crisis of young people coming into the center, and we're in a collaborative of 27 youth agencies. So we're seeing a rise in the number of youth that are experiencing homelessness and crisis from domestic violence, mental illness in the home, whether it's theirs or their families, and a lack of support.
She says the 3 levels of government funding has not kept up with the increase in demand for their services, and agencies are all fighting over the same insufficient pool that is available.
Youth are a very, very small part of the focus and of the funding. At a national, provincial, and municipal level, youth agencies aren't at the decision-making table. They're getting less than 1% of the funding and the focus.
This week, they began fundraising with a goal of $1 million for a unique plan.
So what we're trying to do is advocate to get rid of youth shelters and to create instead small community help centers with a couple beds and 24/7 support, but to minimize the crisis for youth, for staff and community, and really instead look at how do we get into community and support youth there.
A plan that could change many lives for the better. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Ottawa has begun consultations on the creation of a red dress alert system for missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. MMIWG advocates have been calling for such a public alert system for years. The MMIWG inquiry's final report, released in 2019, also calls for the establishment of a national number for missing Indigenous women and girls. Marian Buller is the former chief commissioner of the MMIWG inquiry. She says she's happy Ottawa is finally setting up a red dress alert system.
We've been told several times at the national inquiry that the first 24 hours that after a person goes missing, those are critical times for collecting evidence, tracking people down, spreading out contacts to try to find people. So it's a really critical time, and so much evidence can be lost if that investigation isn't started right away.
We need to step aside for a quick break, but coming up, a look at why the Chiefs of Ontario launched a judicial review over the federal carbon tax. Welcome back to APTN National News. Last week, the Chiefs of Ontario announced it was launching a judicial review of the federal government's Greenhouse Gas and Pollution Pricing Act, more commonly known as the carbon tax. The organization says the tax unfairly targets First Nations people. Many of them still heat their homes with fossil fuels and experience higher rates of poverty. Joining us today to talk about this judicial review is Abram Benedict, Grand Chief of the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. Grand Chief Benedict, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about why the Chiefs of Ontario decided to launch this judicial review at this time?
Absolutely. So over the course of a couple of years, the Chiefs of Ontario has been at the table with either members from the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, trying to come up with some sort of regime or system that acknowledges the unique challenges created by communities, predominantly in the north and obviously within Ontario, with access issues and the cost of, the high exorbitant cost of access to, fuel and necessities. And thus far, over the last, couple of years that we've been chatting with them or have had meetings with them about this, they haven't brought anything substantive to the table. And unfortunately, we've now had to resort to the federal courts and ask for some assistance.
If nothing changes, how might the carbon tax negatively impact First Nations families, particularly those living in Northern Ontario?
Well, I want to be clear that the impact has been felt for some time now, and it's even prior to inflation being at all-time high. As you know, the carbon tax works under the Greenhouse Gas Pricing Act, and if the provinces don't have some sort of regime in place, then the carbon tax becomes the default. And so, since Ontario about 4 years ago, or under 4 years ago, removed the cap and trade program that they have, that implemented the carbon tax being applied across the province of Ontario, which at that time obviously impacted our communities immensely. And we have seen, since the cost of living has gone extremely high to all-time records, it's creating a much more pressure on the communities. So we know at this time it's very difficult for communities to manage this, whether it be individual homeowners or communities as a whole. So there are a number of communities that have diesel power generated electricity for their community, and what is happening in those cases is that the carbon tax is being levied in community and costing an extreme amount of money to the community as a whole, which that money is definitely needed for other programs such as as healthcare or housing and other subsidies or supports to help with the rising costs.
And from what the COO is saying, it sounds like First Nations people living on reserve are not eligible for the same carbon tax rebates as other Canadians. Can you explain why this is?
Well, so we have been at the table with the federal government, and what they have only brought forward is basically the same thing that's available to all Canadians coast to coast, which is either a rebate or subsidy programs that are available. And what we have said to the federal government is that this regime or these rebates will not work for our communities in the north, simply because it's access issues. A number of people don't file income tax because it doesn't, either their income is on reserve, there's no sense in filing income tax, because income tax, the way it works in credits and rebates, is it offsets how much tax you pay in. When you pay no tax in, there's nothing to get back. The other thing is that many remote communities don't have access to tax preparers or H&R Block. So it makes no sense that our community should have to go through the same process any Canadian has to get some sort of relief around the carbon tax.
And finally, last week in the House of Commons, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre brought up the CO's judicial review as part of his party's calls to axe the carbon tax. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I want to make it clear that going to the federal courts was the last resort. I mean, we've been trying to raise this with the minister. We've also been trying to raise this with the prime minister, and there's been no traction. We've only had the bureaucrats at the table providing the same message that they have all along, that these are the subsidies, these are the rebates that are available, regardless of it's in community or not in community. So completely unacceptable. So by going to the federal courts, this is really our last resort, but we are looking to raise the profile on this. The door for negotiations still continues to be open, but what we need is the federal government to come to the table with something meaningful that's going to alleviate the pressures to our communities, and predominantly the communities in the north.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but once again, thanks for joining us today, Grand Chief.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
We need to take one more short break. When we come back, a night of comedy featuring all Indigenous women comedians. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Christopher Clark stopped along his snowmobile trip to take a beautiful picture on what we hope was a great day checking his trap line near Norway House, Manitoba. Thanks for sharing that, Christopher. For the chance to be our next photo of the day, send your pictures to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Over on the east coast, Halifax, snowy 0 degrees, St. John's -4. Nain, snowy there, 1 degree, Happy Valley Goose Bay -8. Quebec City -6, mix of sun and cloud, Gaspé -6. Peterborough -1, Sault Ste. Marie -1 there as well. Timmins -7, mix of sun and cloud, Thunder Bay 1 degree, snowy. The Pas -4, sunny there, Thompson -6. Dauphin sunny, 1 degree, Gimli -5. Swift Current 9 degrees there, North Battleford sunshine 4 degrees. Stony Rapids snowy and -4, La Ronge 0 degrees. Rainy and 5 degrees in Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray 2. Red Deer 13 above and Medicine Hat 18 degrees. Kamloops rainy and 3 degrees, Campbell River sunshine 10. Fort Nelson -15 and sunshine there, Prince Rupert rainy and 5 degrees. Watson Lake -14, mix of sun and cloud, Beaver Creek -19. Norman Wells snowy and -14, Wrigley -16. Paulatuck snowy there, -12, Colville Lake -10. Baker Lake snowy there, -21, Cambridge Bay sunshine -21 there as well. Arctic Bay sunshine and -8, Clyde River -15. Now to Vancouver, where the second annual Night of Comedy featuring all Indigenous women comedians took place. APTN's Tina House was there and now joins us to talk more about the event.
Thank you. We're here at the second annual Airing Grievances Comedy Night, and joining me tonight is the organizer, Debbie Kershane. Debbie, tell me what's happening here tonight.
So we have a great show, 2 shows, 14 women, comedians from all over Canada. We have an early show at 7 p.m., which is new beginner comedians, and then there's 9 p.m., which is all established and women that have been working in the comedy scene for over 10 years.
Amazing. I mean, this is obviously a big scene. I had no idea that there were 14 women that are willing to get up there and tell jokes. Tell me about what this event means to the community and for yourself putting it together.
It's really great. It builds community, and it actually gives an opportunity for Indigenous women to hold their own narratives and create the storylines of what they think is important. And it's really interesting in a way that we welcome people into Indigenous comedy in ways that we haven't seen before.
Awesome. Let's check out some of those highlights tonight.
My name's Tegan Valavand, my Tlingit name's Adagwini, and I'm here to rock your world, baby. That sounded way cooler when I wrote it.
I could either be fun, calm Alana at work that's focused, or I could be fun Alana oversharing my trauma stories at work. Like a couple months ago, my boss asked me, he's like, how'd you end up at the company? I was like, well, when I was 18 months old, I got scooped up by the ministry because my mom had a birth alert. And then when I was in grade 6, I went to residential school. I was looking for my dad online, and I saw there was a job posting, so I applied.
I was talking about my granny earlier. You know, she's a real traditional lady, that one. Wears all the beads, wears all the feathers. Everything that I learned about being niche, I learned from my granny. She's kind of famous, you guys might know her. I don't know if you ever heard of her, but her name's Buffy.
A friend bought me, she got me my astrological chart read for the first time ever on my birthday. And the lady was like, oh my God, you're gonna live a long life. You're gonna live till you're like 80 or 90. I cried. I was like, in this economy? That's a lot of rent.
So these buffalo were like these big, majestic buffalo which were a lot like our men a long time ago. So they were like big, fast, brown, strong. Then the white people, like they brought these cows over, which were like their men. So much, much slower, much, much fluffier, and always searching for greener grass in somebody else's yard.
Well, that was really awesome to see those performances here tonight. Debbie, what does it mean for you personally to see so many women being brave enough to get up there to share comedy, and especially coming out of the pandemic, to be able to get together like this again?
It's really exciting, like to build community and have safe spaces for women to like say what's important to them and what's, it's like talking at Auntie's table, and just sharing everything that goes on in your life. So it creates a great opening for women to feel safe and try comedy for the first time.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on a very successful event once again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you in studio.
Some great jokes there. Thanks for sharing that, Tina. And that's all the time we have for your Monday news. For news anytime, visit our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly, and from all of us here at APTN News, Marcy, Miigwech, thank you for joining us. Take care and have a great night.